Hey, it's Larry Call from Sales Sherpa. I am here with Jason Bay from Blissful Prospecting. Jason and I have connected over the last month or so, and I've been checking out some of the stuff that he's been doing in terms of sales prospecting. And there were some comments he made when we talked that I think would be very interested to our audience here on revenue secrets. And one of the things Jason said to me is that as a solo practitioner, a consultant, an entrepreneur, a solo business owner, outbound prospecting, being on the phone, making phone calls is really table stakes to being successful. And my reaction was, how are people going to do that? The type of people that are probably watching this show are not sales development reps, SDRs, inside sales experts. So I just like to open up the floor. Jason, you want to tell us a little bit about kind of where you come from here and what got you into this expertise that you're bringing to the market right now, and then what's the answer to people who need to do this?
Yeah, totally. So I think a good place to start is, my only adult job that I've ever had has either been a salesperson or, running a business. And I'm 31 years old. My first job was at 18. It was selling, and I was going door to door selling house painting services. So that's how I got into sales was, doing this kind of cold prospecting. And there's a couple of lessons that I learned that I think are applicable to any business or looking for business or any, person running a business. And there's two things that I noticed when I was going door to door, because this company would hire me and they would train you how to do it. And that's how I learned to do sales and that sort of stuff. And one thing that I noticed is that just because a neighborhood needed a lot of painting in that neighborhood, so 8 or 9 out of 10 houses, let's say, had peeling paint, didn't mean that people really cared about getting their house painted. Right. And actually, what I found was the opposite. So if I looked for places where maybe 1 or 2 out of every 10 houses needed painting, those people were actually more receptive because those people cared about what their house looked like. They valued it beyond just needing it. And I think that's a really important lesson. Like when you look at your business, how can we find people that value what we can help them with? So you might be selling leadership consult. I don't know what kind of, what your people sell. It might be some sort of training or leadership development or marketing or whatever it might be. How can we find the pockets of people that really value this? And I can guarantee you that if you're a solopreneur, unless you're got a huge platform, the people that you want to work with, not all of them are likely coming to you. There's probably some companies out there, I imagine, that you would love to get on their radar, but they aren't coming to you. So that was like the first thing I picked up was like, go beyond the need and look for and find people that you can proactively, find that value what you do. And the second part is, I think, with prospecting, there's kind of this misconception that, we are selling stuff when we're prospecting. And what I always say is don't prospect to make a sale, prospect to start a conversation. So when I would go door to door and try to sell house painting services to people, no one was interested. But when I talked about what their neighbors were going to be doing that summer with their house, or I said, hey, we could do an estimate. I could show you how we might be able to fix that peel and paint that you have up there, and we can schedule it next week. Are you interested in doing that? A lot of people were interested in that. So when we're prospecting, the goal is not to because I think a big fear people have is being salesy, right? Oh, you're telling me, Jason, I need to pick up the phone and start calling people and saying, hey, Larry, I'm a consultant. I do really great work with this stuff, and I want to meet with you and work with you. No, that's not how we prospect. We really need to figure out the people that we're approaching, if we can approach from a place of curiosity and be like, I wonder what kind of problems this company might be having that my expertise could really help with. And I need to start with them. And I need to make it about them, not make it about me. So that's kind of how I got into sales. And that segues kind of into blissful prospecting, where, when I left that company, I worked with them for 6 or 7 years. I had an outbound call center that I started with them, and I wanted to help other companies. So I've done the solopreneur, the consulting thing, and that was in 2013. And what I found in a lot of the business that I was getting was that I needed to figure out how to prospect for business to business. And as I started getting clients, I noticed that every business that I talked to wanted to do more prospecting, needed to do more prospecting, either didn't like doing it or didn't know how to do it. And that's sort of what we got into what we're doing now around coaching, training, around how do we do outbound in a way that doesn't feel really weird. right? How do we sell our expertise as a trainer, coach, consultant, whatever it might be, in a way that doesn't feel salesy, where I prioritize the prospect's needs over mine, and it's not just me talking about myself, being a jerk. So that's kind of a long-winded response to your question there, but I think that gives some good context into how I
It,
got here.
it does. And I think what you did is you made it more relevant for the audience. And what I heard were two things that are really important that many people, I don't believe, do understand. First, there is a focus to it. So you're trying to talk to people who want to talk to you. You're not trying to convince somebody to want to talk to you. So that's the first thing. So it takes a lot of the fear and sales pressure out of it for people. And then I think the second thing that you're mentioning is that, yes, there's going to be rejection. You have to be ready for that, but you can minimize your feeling on your side that you're interrupting and bothering people if you understand that the offer you're making to them fits with what you're used to. So most of the people that I know who are delivering some sort of a service are actually very good at solving problems and have a lot of ideas. So if you approach it that way, is what I'm hearing you say, then it could actually be a fun exercise to
Yeah.
be able to get out there and do that. So let's say we set this up, and the audience accepts this as the context. Get out of the I'm just knocking on doors. You got to get your house Tin Men. I thought of Tin Men when you were talking about it. Here's the model home down the street. You want your home to look like the model home down the street, and then they do all these tricks and stuff and get in trouble with the Home Improvement Commission. So you're talking about something a little bit different. So let's say I buy into it. Then what has to happen next?
So
So I'm ready to put something together.
yeah, so there's three core components to prospecting. And prospecting, like I want to reiterate again, prospecting is different from selling. Those are two totally different skill sets. Prospecting is more of what I would call a marketing skill set. It's more of a how can I get the appointment? So there's three buckets. So if you kind of envision, I guess people are going to be watching this, so you can kind of see if you envision three circles, and the first one is the identifying. So this is your ability to find good fit opportunities. That's your ideal client profiles and your personas. Next, what you have is your ability to engage and start conversations. That's your messaging. So what does the email say? What do I say when I call someone? What do the LinkedIn messages say, et cetera? And what's the sequence? So what is the right number of activities? Because it's not just a call once, leave a voicemail, and then move on to the next one. There's got to be an actual contact strategy. And then on the very right, what you have is the convert bucket. So identify, engage, convert. Convert is how do we start a conversation and then get an appointment with someone. So where we want to start in that identify bucket is having a clear idea of who our ideal client is. And a really simple exercise you can do is look at your last 6 to 12 months worth of clients, the ones that are kind of a combination of like who gets the most value from what you do. So who do you have case studies with, testimonials with, et cetera? Because when you go to prospect, you're going to say things like, hey, Larry, we've worked with other companies similar to yours. And one thing they tell me is that they have a problem like this. And like, here's some of the ways that they were solving that. And you can share a case study or a testimonial from a company that's like theirs. It feels familiar to the prospect. You're going to look at companies that are the easiest for you to sell, that like really understand your service offering and that sort of stuff. And then what you can do is use a tool like LinkedIn, or Apollo.io is another tool that I like. And you're going to pick out patterns of what's the common industry, what size are these companies. And you're going to go on the persona level too. Who do I typically interact with at these companies? So who do I interact with this within the sales process that's a champion that kind of helps me move the deal forward? Who is a decision maker, who influences the decision, et cetera. So just look at your past track record of success, and you're going to create an ideal client profile. It needs to be very specific. So for me, I want to work with software companies, SaaS companies, between 50 and 500 employees. That's a decent sized range there, but one thing they all have in common is they have good product market fit if they've gotten to that size. They have a sales team. They probably have SDRs, BDRs, account executives, whatever it might be. They have sales managers in place helping them, and that's a good fit for me. So that's what you need in place first, the identify bucket. And I'll go ahead and pause there. Is there anything you want to dig into more when it comes to identifying a good fit opportunity before we even engage them or send out a message or anything like that?
So as far as I identify, what I'm hearing from you is don't overcomplicate it. So you don't need necessarily a 2 month strategy session to try to find out where to position your company, unless you do, and that's a whole nother project before you get to doing something like this. So you can quickly figure out who you want to go after. You can fairly simply, with some of the tools available, put your list together and prepare yourself to get started. Is there anything else and I identify that somebody really has to spend a lot of necessary critical time on?
Yeah, I think another thing to mention is that what you might feel like if you're watching this that I'm asking you to do is say no to a lot of people that you could work with. I'm not asking you to do that. What I'm asking you to do is that if you're going to proactively reach out to people, that is a very hard thing to do, that is very time intensive. Let's do that in a way that sets ourselves up for success. And the best way to do that is to try to emulate our past successes. So, where do we find that we like working with these? What's our sweet spot of company and the people? And it needs to be as objective as possible. So, like, you need to find clear indicators of like industry, employee count, like things that you can measure, and then go find other companies like that. Maybe if you do marketing stuff and you focus a lot on website, conversion or website optimization, let's say, maybe one thing for you that you need is they need to have a certain amount of web traffic for it to make sense for them to want to invest in that. We'll use tools like Alexa or whatever other tools they have out there to measure web traffic, right? So look for all those kind of patterns and similarities in the customers. Maybe they need to use a particular tool. So you need to use a tool like Built With to figure out, do they use HubSpot or not? That might be one of your requirements, right? So kind of look and see like what the ideal client looks like for you objectively, not just oh, they have good branding. Like you need something a little bit more objective than that, so that you can start making a list. And what I would suggest starting with is identify 10 to 25 companies and put them on a list. And this becomes like your target list of like dream clients. Like these are the ones that would completely change your business. And those are the ones worth pursuing and spending a ton of effort going after.
I like outbound prospecting myself. It
Mhm.
is hard and it
Yep.
takes some specific skill sets. And the reason I like it is that you can go after the people you really want. One of the challenges with traditional advertising, digital advertising, or content marketing is you never know who's going to show up and who you're going to attract. And that's the same issue with networking and relying on a referral network. So you could have a lot of prospective opportunities and build a pipeline of people you don't necessarily want to work with, are just not ideal for you. So I really like what you're saying there. As you start to get that list put together, um, how much of this is a numbers game? I mean, I think there's this old school mentality of 200 dials a day and really spending that time in the trenches. What is the balance between this core ideal target list and spending time on those versus the volume necessary just to make the math work?
Yeah, great question. And a quick comment on what you mentioned with inbound. I think a big challenge that I hear with solopreneurs, especially, is if you want to move your business up market and work with bigger clients, because your current client roster might not necessarily reflect that, and those companies might not be coming to you, right? So that's where outbound can come in. So in terms of numbers, though, the way that I would think about it is it depends on like what you have bandwidth for. So if you're starving for clients right now, I don't know why you're not marketing and prospecting like crazy the majority of your time, right? So it's like that's kind of how I look at it. But I think for most people probably watching this, they want to work with more clients. You're probably pretty busy fulfilling work too. So what I would think about is how can I keep the list very small, and how can I make these companies like the absolute best fits, so that when I go to reach out to these 10 companies, I'm maybe reaching out to 2 or 3 people at a time at each company. And I'm keeping it very short and sweet, where maybe I spend an hour a day working 3 to 5 companies, and I'm calling them, I'm calling different people. And maybe there's 15 or 20 people that I interact with throughout that week, hoping that I can get 2 or 3 meetings from that. I'd rather play that quality game if I'm a consultant or a solopreneur, knowing that I'm spending a lot of time doing other stuff. You're not a salesperson. You don't have the opportunity to play the volume game really, and you don't really need to, in my
That's good
opinion.
to know that you don't need
Yeah,
to. I'm sure that's going to make
yeah,
people happy that putting
yeah,
some effort into it, hour a day, few hours a week, if you get
yeah.
busier, makes a lot of sense. As you get into the second circle, then, you'd mentioned, email and LinkedIn and
Mhm.
calls and sequencing.
Yep.
That it seems complicated to set that up. People understand what you're talking about, but from an execution operations standpoint, how do you do that so you know what to do when you're
Yeah.
focusing on this?
Good question. So the thing that sort of connects that identify and engage bucket is if you go up here, there's problems. So before we actually think about what tools we're gonna use, we need to think about like what the messaging is going to say. So one thing that we really need to focus on is like, what is the problem that we're fixing? In exercise that you can do, I call it the path. And it's a simple exercise where you can figure out like, what is the current state of this prospect? So if we're looking at a box right here, and let's say it's on a graph, you got the x-axis, you got the y-axis. The y-axis is results, right? And the x-axis is time. So if you look at a prospect's current state, let's use an example. So I'm working with a consulting firm right now that sells services that help businesses essentially spend less and get overcharged less on their utilities. So they go and they renegotiate for them and they split the savings. So the CFO is the person. So the current state of that CFO is they handle this internally, right? They do this themselves. They handle the relationship, they handle the negotiation, et cetera. And one of the big problems they complain about is one, it takes up a lot of time away from their business and things they want to be doing. And number two, they aren't able to successfully actually negotiate and get the pricing that they want. They feel like they're getting bullied around. So if we look at current state, and again, we move along this axis, there's two things that we need to think about. What is the desired future state of the prospect? And then if we go down on the results, what is the undesired future state? So where do they want to head and what do they want to avoid? And when we're selling, a really simple way to think about it is we're just helping prospects to that desired future state and we're helping them avoid the undesired future state. So if we again go along with this example, think about like what the desired future state is. Well, the desired future state for a CFO is our business is profitable. We're not wasting money in areas that I don't know about, right? Et cetera. And then the undesired state is I'm spending money on something and I don't know that I'm overspending, or I'm spending money on something and the price keeps going up on these utilities and I feel helpless because I can't find ways to fix it. So once we have that, that becomes like our messaging. The messaging is like we're helping people avoid this thing that they don't want to do, and we're helping with problems in their current state. So when we think about the sequence, like let's think about like the core, like what are the 2 or 3 big problems that you help your clients with? Like what problems do they have? So I gave you an example already. For me, my prospects, like the biggest problem that they have is usually a couple centered around a couple things, but their reps aren't setting enough appointments. That's really what the core problem is. And the situation they're trying to avoid is a situation where the reps don't want to pick up the phone because they feel call reluctant. Right. So I can focus on the call reluctance piece. That's a big problem. So my first email is going to focus on that message. And then I might send a second email that says, any thoughts? Right. So I'm thinking of this sequence as in like 2 or 3 big problems. I'm sending an email here, and then I'm calling, maybe sending a LinkedIn connection request. So I'm doing what's called a triple touch. So I'm at least sending an email and a phone call. And then 2 days later, I'm going to send a short follow-up that says something along the lines of any thoughts, or hey, here's a quick case study, or here's a piece of content. Week 2 is going to follow that same pattern. And you could do that 3 or 4 weeks in a row, where you could spread it out even a little bit more if you want. But the sequence is, how can I do 12 to 15 touches over a 3 to 4 week period across 2 to 3 channels, email, phone. And your question was like, well, how do we execute this? You could do this manually. You could use spreadsheets if you want to just try it and you don't want to deal with the technology. You could use your CRM to do it, or you could use a solution like Apollo.io is built for that. Apollo.io will allow you to do searches for companies, find the people, get their contact information, and it'll allow you to sequence them in one place too. So I can have the tool help me run this 12-stage sequence where I'm going to email, call, follow up a couple of days later. The second week, I'm going to focus on a different problem, maybe that is a big thing that we help people with. Follow up with that. Third week, same kind of pattern. So that's how we want to think about the sequencing and the messaging. What's really important is that we're not just reaching out and saying, hey, Larry, I'm Jason Bay. I run Blissful Prospecting. Here's what I do. It's, hey, Larry, saw this particular thing, personalized message. Here's a problem that I hear people like you sharing with me, or here's a problem that my clients have in this area, and here's a way that they're fixing it. Are you interested in chatting to learn a little bit more? It needs to be about you, the prospect. What are things that I can find related to you? And we can dig into that in more detail if you want. But more importantly, what is your problem? What is that undesired future state? What is the thing that you're trying to avoid? And how are you fixing that or trying to fix it right now?
I think what you're saying is very important. So this simple idea of putting columns together and writing it out, because most of the people who are listening know the answers to
Mhm.
those things, more or less of, where you're trying to get and what are you trying to avoid. And if you start there and you write that down, you're going to get yourself out of the trap of just talking about yourself, about the what or even the how of what you do, and you'll be much more effective. As you go into the third circle, then now we're getting into a different type of skill. It sounds like you want to explain the sort of the next stage. Let's say we know where we're going and we're starting to go there in a methodical way.
Yeah. So now what we're going to run into and what connects that engage stage with the convert stage is objection handling, right? And
Yes.
that's, hey, you're going to get people on the phone, and you know what they're going to do? They're going to say, we're already taken care of. We're already working with someone. We do this ourselves, not interested, whatever it might be. You're going to get responses back to your emails that say very similar stuff. So we need to know how to objection handle,
Yeah, and
which,
the common response, I would imagine people here know, from the caller side, leads to call reluctance, because there's this feeling of nobody cares.
yeah. Well, and there's also maybe a feeling of, oh, I'm bugging the person.
Mm.
God, everyone I talk to says they're not interested. I know these people are super busy. I shouldn't pester them.
And I
Right?
want to put a little note out here to the business owners that are listening to this is, don't make a decision at this point that it doesn't work.
Yeah. So you're going to figure out a lot of stuff. That's a natural part of the game. So there's a couple of things that we have to understand. So I always like doing a little exercise. It's called deconditioning. It's also referred to as pattern interruption. And deconditioning is essentially, I learned about it just going through therapy, but it's also a process they use to help people with addictions and things like that. And deconditioning is essentially a four-part process. If you envision like kind of a quadrant like this, if you're watching, in the upper left quadrant, you have identify the pattern. So the pattern is, hey, when I go to call people or when I go to email someone and they tell me not interested, like that doesn't make me feel very good. That makes me feel salesy, whatever. The pattern is usually the easy part to identify. Now, if we go to the upper right quadrant, the second part to that is pinpointing the trigger. So what we need to do is get like super, super specific with exactly what happens that causes me to slip into this pattern. And usually what it is something like this. When someone says not interested, the internal dialogue that you tell yourself is what I said before. I'm bugging the person. Why would they want to reach out to me and hear what I have to say? This person has 20 years of experience in the role. Why would they possibly need my help? We start telling ourselves all these weird stories, right? Now, if we go down, I guess it would be on this side here. So if we go down to the third phase, what we're doing here is we need to derail and replace. So with that trigger, instead of that trigger making it about us and what we are feeling, inadequate, I'm bothering the person, what if we made it more about Larry? What if we made it more about the prospect? And we said things like this, oh, when someone says not interested, or hey, I feel call reluctant, I'm not going to pick up the phone. What if instead you kind of lean in and think more about the prospect? Well, hey, I'm really curious if this person is running across a problem that I might be able to help with. I wonder if this person, so curiosity, right? I wonder if this person is similar to our client that was also dealing with this thing. If they wouldn't find it helpful if I sent over some information on like how our client dealt with this problem or ways that they could be reducing their costs or whatever it might be. So we can derail and replace, and instead of making it about how we feel about it, let's just focus on the prospect. And then that fourth part of the quadrant, so I guess would go into like a circle like this. The fourth part of the quadrant is like practice, right? So how do we continue making that a habit? Do we use an app like Way of Life on our phone to track the number of times that we do it? Do we use a whiteboard like I have here to tell it? Do we use whatever it might be? But like you need to like really be super present and think about what is the exact moment in time that happens where I start to slip into this pattern, and how can I do a 180 there and kind of tell myself the opposite? How could I do the opposite? And in this case, it's don't make it about you, make it about them. Prospecting, like the number one keystone habit with prospecting and really selling is you first, me second. How can I make this entire interaction about you, the prospect, Larry, and less about me, the person talking to you?
What I love about this is that what you just did for people that follow this is you gave them a way to avoid having a feeling of doing something wrong when you're on the phone. So you're not allowing that rejection to become internalized rejection. So what you're seeing is there's techniques that you can use to avoid doing that, but you have to be conscious of that, and you have to have that set up as a strategy before you start calling people. And that's going to be really important for people that are listening to this, because we're not talking to people here, professionals that are doing this all day long.
Mhm.
So intermittent calling is now what we're really looking to help people get to. We're looking for people to have a pattern that they follow for years as part of their normal pipeline building process, even when they're busy with clients.
Yep.
So you got three great circles. I know there's a lot more to this. This is just an introductory outline, so some people can run with it just from this. Other people are going to want a lot more background and details on how to do it. What can you offer people that are interested in more support to get started?
Yeah. So we do a couple things. So on our website, blissfulprospecting.com, that's where you can find all this stuff. So if you're kind of at a stage where you're like, hey, this really sounds good, I want to explore, and like, what other content do you have out there, Jason? Well, there's a resource page we got a podcast. I post daily content on LinkedIn. I suggest getting on our newsletter. I send an email or two out every week. We do free webinars. So there's a ton of free stuff there. But if you're in a stage where you're like, I would actually like help implementing this, we do that in a couple different ways. So when we have boot camps that are more like a public, like, hey, I want to kind of get this information in 6 weeks and, sort of get help in a group fashion. So there's like a course that comes with that. That's like, here's all the information, you get lifetime access to it. And then we hop on group coaching calls with me and I can help you kind of troubleshoot and implement it. That's pretty effective. It's kind of open to the public. And we have another program called Accelerator, where if you're looking for kind of like the one-on-one experience where you want to work individually with me, that's more of like a 3-month thing. And how can we get the content, the coaching, build a playbook, and like help you personally implement this stuff in your business? That's typically how we work with people.
All right, that sounds great, Jason. This was really, really helpful. We'll have the information available to everybody so they can get in touch with you if they're interested. And thanks again for spending so much time on this. And I just want to mention that your podcast is really amazing. And a couple of the last episodes that I heard, I really liked. And what he did is you actually broke down some recorded calls. So you were
Yeah.
coaching somebody on the podcast as if you were consulting,
Yeah.
which I guess essentially you were with them, so people could hear what works and what doesn't work in a live scenario.
Yeah. It's pretty cool. That's the one thing I hear people always want to hear more of, or that they haven't heard, is, hey, you're telling me to make calls, Jason, but I need to hear an example. Like, what does that sound like when other people do it? What does good and bad look like? What does it sound like, et cetera? So yeah, I appreciate the kind words, man. And you having me on the show.
Awesome. Thanks again. Appreciate it, Jason. Thanks for listening. If you're self-employed and tired of not having enough great clients, join our free Revenue Climber Club. Click salessherpa.co for details and to sign up for the community. Stop climbing alone and reach the summit together with us.